Hello, this is Turali, and in today's chapter, we are going to see the length and the breadth of the PMI-PBA exam. As you can see on the screen over here, these are all the knowledge and skills that we need to know really well for our PBA exam. So what I'm going to do today is a really quick review of the 40 knowledge and skills that we have to understand. So in the previous lecture, I did talk about the different 5 domains that we have for our exam. I have even put an extra domain where we have knowledge and skills that would be covered and used in all the 5 domains that we have. So let's start over here. Like you can see, everything is color coded with respect to the domain that we are in. The first one being development methodologies. This is where we are going to see which is the best development methodology that can be used for the project. Some of the commonly used methodologies that we have is the waterfall methodology, the agile methodology, then we have the lean software development and Kanban software development. Now this will be covered in detail when I get to those detailed chapters. The second knowledge and skills that is commonly used throughout all the domains is elicitation and facilitation tool and technique. Now, the facilitation and elicitation techniques are techniques that the BA should know really well, and this is because the facilitation and elicitation basically means to draw out a response or an answer to translate business needs into clear statements. And facilitation means is just making it easier to draw out all these responses. So for the elicitation and facilitation techniques, we are going to use some vision development techniques, some research techniques where we research about the topic, models used during facilitation process, then there are focus groups, then we have surveys and questionnaires technique where we conduct surveys and ask a lot of questions to the stakeholders regarding the project requirements. Then as business analysts, we would even do observation and job shadowing. We would conduct interviews with the stakeholders. And lastly, we have to do is some document analysis. The next one in line is the decision-making technique. Now, there are a lot of these decision-making technique, and this is really important for the business analyst because we need agreement from the stakeholders, from the team members regarding any problems or any requirements that we have for the project. So for doing this, some of the decision-making techniques that we have is the Delphi technique. We have multi-voting technique where the team members, where the stakeholders are going to vote. Then we have option analysis that we are going to look into different options and select and pick the best options. Then we have consensus building technique. In fact, multi-voting, poker planning that you see over here, these are different types of consensus building technique where we build consensus among stakeholders. So once the decision is made, we can go ahead with the project, with the requirements. So there's a lot of stress on the decision making technique. So I will get to this and explain all these different types of decision making techniques in details with diagrams, as you can see over here on the screen. Then the next knowledge and skill that we have is leadership, principles, and skills. Now, as a BA, it is really important that you have leadership skills. Now, we are going to take a look into what are leadership skills, how you can become a leader, how you can use your interpersonal skills as a business analyst to motivate the team, to communicate the team, how you will be using negotiating, trust building, how you are going to manage conflicts, how you are going to coach the team. So all that is involved in this knowledge and skills, which is leadership, principles, and skills. This is negotiation tool and technique. As a BA, you will have to negotiate with stakeholders because not all stakeholders would agree to what you are providing them, and they would always want more. They would always want to add more scope to the work in the less amount of time and not providing extra funding. So negotiation gets really important over there, because if you do not negotiate, then the project is not going to complete on time or won't complete on the budget, and there is a big chance your project would fail. So we are going to take a look into the negotiation purposes, the skills and behaviors used to negotiate successfully. What is alternate dispute resolution? If we have disputes, what is the best way to solve the dispute? And then types of alternate dispute resolution. The other knowledge and skills which is very important for a BA is communication and collaboration. Now, BA is primarily working with all stakeholders to get the requirements, and those requirements have to be communicated to the team members so that the requirements are developed correctly. So communications is a key over here. So how you are going to communicate to the team members, what is information management systems, where does all the communication go, how do you store it, how do you share all this information? So that is where we have to look into the communication and collaboration. Some of the tools that we'll use is going to be communication requirement analysis, communication technology, like are you using phone for communication, are you using email for communication, what is the technology that is available, are you using SharePoint to share all your files? Then we have communication models, different types of communication methods, verbal and non-verbal communication. Then the next one that is important is the technical and business writing. What's the difference between these two? Then how do we collaborate with our team members? Are we going to use collaboration techniques like video conferencing, co-locate all the team members together? We are going to have some daily stand-up meetings, especially in Agile and Scrum methodology. This is what we use, is a daily stand-up meeting to see if everything is going as planned or to see if there are any blocks during our sprint. Then other collaboration tools include email and instant messenger and face-to-face meetings. The next one is the conflict management, which I said is really important because there's always going to be conflict between the team members. There's always going to be conflicts with the stakeholders. So how are you going to manage these conflicts is important. The factors that influence conflict resolution methods are then 6 general techniques of resolving conflicts, which you see over here is withdrawing or avoiding a conflict, how to smooth a conflict, how to accommodate a conflict, how do you compromise when there's a conflict, how do you force if there is a conflict, collaborating, confronting, and how do you solve a problem if there is a conflict. The next one we have is political and cultural awareness. As a BA, we need to be politically and culturally aware because we will have team members from different areas, different cultures, different geographic locations. So our main job is to make sure that all the team members get the information, get the requirements, and understand these requirements. So we have to be sensitive to their culture. We have to be sensitive to their political inclination. And so that's what we are going to do over here is organizational culture and business analyst. Organization politics. So there are always going to be some kind of politics at organization. So how we work with these organization politics to make it easier and better. Then what is cultural awareness and sensitivity? How to develop cultural awareness. So this all we need to know as BAs so that we make sure that everyone in the team is culturally aware and everyone is making sure that we are following the organization's policies and procedures regarding cultural awareness. Then the next knowledge and skill that we have over here is reporting tools and techniques. This is where we are going to report our progress, report our status to the stakeholders, informing them where we are at with the project, how much of the requirements are in the design phase, how much of the requirements are in the user experience phase, how much of the requirements are in the development phase or the testing phase, how much of the requirements have we complete, what is our status. So all these we need to send to the stakeholders on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis so they are updated on the requirements and the scope of the project. So we are going to see the project reports, we are going to see the reporting systems, status reports, project performance reports, information management system, trend analysis, and variance analysis. Variance analysis meaning we have a scope baseline and how much of a variance do we have with respect to our scope baseline. Are we doing and finishing all our requirements on time as planned, or we are behind the schedule, or we are ahead of schedule? So all this will happen in the reporting tool and technique. So we get to the next domain now, which is needs assessment. And as the name says, we are going to assess the needs of the stakeholders, of the customer, of the client. So the techniques that we are using for the needs assessment are over here. The first one being valuation tool and technique, where we do a valuation of the project. And for that, we are using some techniques as the cost benefit analysis, where we are going to look into the ratio of the cost and the benefit and see if that project is worth going ahead. Then we have the SWOT analysis, where it is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that are going to be analyzed before the project. We have force field analysis, where we are going to look into forces against change and forces for the change. We have next one is the net promoter score, and how to calculate this net promoter score and what this net promoter score is. We have value stream mapping, Kano model, purpose-based alignment model, which includes the quadrants, and purpose-based alignment model. So let's see, we have some diagrams that we are going to look into, which is the SWOT analysis. What this is, as I said, strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities. Then we have the force field analysis, where we are looking into the forces for change and forces against the change. Then we have the net promoter score. So we'll see how to calculate this net promoter score and what this net promoter score is. And finally, we have the Kano model and what this Kano model is going to be. So these are the different valuation techniques that we need to know for the PMI-PBA exam. Now let's go to the next one. We have stakeholder analysis. This is really important because we have to analyze the stakeholders. We have to see what are the different types of stakeholders we have. For doing this, we are using tools and techniques to identify these stakeholders, personas and its purpose, where we're going to see the benefits of personas, elements of personas, what is the power and interest grid when it comes to the stakeholders, the RACI chart and the RAM chart and what they mean. So if you look over here, we see the power and interest grid of the stakeholders. So who has more power and who have the high interest, and what we need to do to these stakeholders or with these stakeholders. In this case, we need to manage them closely. Then we have the RACI chart and the RAM chart. The RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So these are the different team members or the stakeholders that have been assigned these tasks. So we are going to see who is accountable, who is consulted, who is informed, and that will help the team members. Then we have the RAM chart, which is very similar to the RACI chart. It's called as the responsibility assignment matrix. So who is responsible for which task that you can see over here. In this case, the sponsor is the primary responsibility, the business analyst is the secondary responsibility, and so on and so forth. So that's what we have in stakeholder analysis. So it's really important to analyze these stakeholders, make sure that these stakeholders are involved during the whole process, and update it accordingly. The next needs and assessment knowledge and skill that we have is problem solving and opportunity identification. Now this is where we are solving the problems that arise during our project or even before our project. So for doing this, we are going to use different techniques as value engineering. We are going to use scenario analysis. We are going to do brainstorming to opportunity identification, to identify any opportunities that we might have. We are going to use user journey maps, which is part of the UX team, user interface or user experience. Then we have user journey touch points. So in this, you are doing scenario analysis, where we are going to look into the optimistic scenario, pessimistic scenario, and most likely scenario. And using the PERT formulae, we are going to calculate the perfect scenario. We are going to brainstorm the ideas. We are going to use the user journey maps or user experience journey. One example that we have is when someone goes on the website, how are you going to guide them through the website visually? So those are the user journey map. Again, over here, this is your Google Maps, where the user can take a look at the map and get all the directions, and touch points are going to be the important areas that the user needs to go through. Then let's go to the next knowledge and skills in needs assessment, which is organization assessment. This is where you're going to assess the organization. This is where you're going to assess do a readiness assessment, as in how ready your organization is maybe for a change. Then steps to assess the organization. So you're going to look into the one of the ways of assessing the organization is you're going to look into the leadership, the operations, the customers, the financial status of the organization, and anything over there what would impact the organization. Once the need assessment is done, we go to the planning domain. Need assessment is the first thing that the business analysts do is during the beginning of the project. And once we have finalized, we have done all our needs assessment, we have gone through all our decision processes, we have done all the problem opportunity identification, problem solving, value engineering, stakeholder analysis, valuation tools we've used. Once we've done all of this, we will go to the planning domain. In the planning domain, the first knowledge and skill that we come across, or that's the first thing that we need to do in the planning domain, is the requirement management plan, where we are going to look into the elements of these requirement management plan. Basically, how we are going to collect the requirements, how we are going to manage the activities, example, tracking the requirements, reporting the requirements, tracing the requirements, validating the requirements, where we are going to do requirement documentation, what are the different types of requirements that are going to be required. For example, business requirements, stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, transition requirements, project requirements, quality requirements. Then we are going to do is a requirement management plan, make a complete requirement management plan, which is going to be followed throughout the whole project. And as I said before, it is going to include all the planning activities, all the managing activities. It is going to include the requirement management approach, configuration management, requirement prioritization as to how the requirements are going to be prioritized, which requirement should be done first, which should be done after, the product metrics, how we are going to trace the requirement throughout the whole project. All that is going to be part of this knowledge and skill, which is requirement management plan and its elements. So we'll go through all of this and how we are going to plan the requirements, and in the plan what we are going to follow and do. So the next knowledge and skill in domain is planning tool and technique. Now, how we are going to plan this? There are a couple different types of planning techniques we have is strategic planning, tactical planning, and we look into the difference between the strategic and the tactical planning. The term strategy usually is a thinking process required to plan a change or course of action, while on the other hand, tactical planning supports strategic plans by translating them into specific plans. Like an example for strategic planning would be the market share leader in terms of sale in the cell phone industry. Sell more coffee at a premium price. So this is our strategic plan. Now, the tactical plan example would be offer low-cost options than competitors for the first year of customer contracts. Then the other tactical plan for the coffee is going to be add more caffeine and get the customers addicted. So as you can see over here, we have a strategic plan, and to fulfill that plan and to be successful in that plan, we have to use a tactical plan in this case. So for the coffee, if we want to sell it at a premium price, we have to add more coffee and get the customers addicted, so they won't go for coffee anywhere else. So this is the planning tool and technique where we saw the strategic and tactical plan and what it is. Now let's go to the next planning tool and technique, which is estimating. Estimating is important because we need to estimate the time of these requirements that we have. We need to estimate how long should it take for this requirement to complete. So that is where we are using this estimating technique. Some of the estimating techniques that we need to do is poker planning. Now, in poker planning, we use an estimating technique where we are playing poker, not like real life poker, but this is like playing poker with cards where we assign a number to different user stories. Now, this is used in the Agile methodology in Scrum. That's what we will look into when we get to that in detail later on. So we'll see poker planning, estimation procedure. Then what are the different types of project estimates? Estimating types, estimating accuracy, estimating assumptions, contingency to estimates, commonly used estimation techniques. The PERT technique, which we even saw before, was program evaluation and review technique, where we look into the optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely estimates. Then we have consensus estimating, where we reach consensus, where we're using decision-making techniques like the Delphi technique, where we reach consensus. We have phase ratio estimating and quadrant analysis. So this is what we are going to go, like what you can see over here. The poker planning can be done online. These are some of the poker planning cards that we can use. So it assigns points called as story points and how long it's going to take. Or we can use a poker planning app that is easily available online. Then we have the program evaluation and review technique called as the PERT technique, where we have the different tasks. We assign optimistic, pessimistic, or most likely value, and then we get the final estimate, where we're using the formula and get the average using the formula, and that will give us the PERT 3-point estimate. Then we have the phase and ratio estimating, where we are going to look into which phase we are going to be in and how long should it take in those particular phases. Then we have quadrant analysis, where we identify key vulnerabilities, we identify strategic advantages, we identify potential advantages and potential vulnerabilities. So these are the estimating tools and techniques that are used in the planning domain. Now we have another estimating tool. We have another tool and technique used in the planning domain, which is product backlog management. Now this is used in Agile in Scrum, where we have a lot of user stories and we put it in a backlog. And so we are going to see what this product backlog is, who is responsible for prioritizing the requirements in this backlog, Then who creates and manages the product backlog? What do they do? Then characteristics of a good product backlog. Then what happens in product backlog management. So all that we are going to see here. And then this is a typical product backlog where you have the estimate story points estimates on this side for the items that you have in the backlog, the different stories you have in the backlog, the different tasks that you have in the backlog. Then you are going to prioritize these stories. You are going to estimate, using poker planning, how long is each story going to take. Are you going to insert new stories? Where you're going to take out, delete the old stories that you really don't need. So someone needs to manage this backlog, create this backlog, insert the stories in this backlog, which we are going to see when we get there in detail. So that's the product backlog. The next planning technique we have is the prioritization tool and technique, is how we prioritize, and we've seen this one before. We have the Moscow technique, which is the must-have, which is for M. S is going to be should have, C is for could have, W is won't have. So this is a technique that you would use with the stakeholders and ask them that which are the requirements which are a must-have, which are a should-have, which are a could-have, and which it really doesn't matter, you won't have. Okay, so then what are the Moscow technique categories? What is multi-voting technique? What is weighted criteria? When to use weighted criteria? So that's the Moscow. We saw the multi-voting where we vote for all these requirements and then we pick the requirements which has the most votes. Then we have the alternative design evaluation process, where I take an example and then we assign weights to the different alternates that we have and we pick the best alternative. So that's done in prioritization tool and technique that is used in the planning domain to prioritize these requirements. The next one in line is the contingency planning. What is a contingency plan? Why do we do contingency planning? What are the benefits? What should it include? What are the tools and techniques to establish reserves? How to maintain a contingency plan? Risk management process, and tools and techniques used to identify risk. Okay, so contingency plan is a plan devised for an outcome other than the usual expected plan. So we planned to do these many requirements. Now what would happen if we were unable to do some of these requirements? Do we have a backup plan? Do we have a contingency plan? What are we going to do about it? How are we going to go about it? So all this needs to be planned beforehand. It's not like when something like this happens and we don't know what to do. So that is the part of the risk management process and the techniques that will be used to identify any risk to the requirements that could happen during the process of our project. So we are going to take a look at all these in detail. Then we'll have a contingency plan for our project or for some of the tasks that might happen in the future. Then we will go to the next one in planning, which is an important one, which is document management tool and technique. How we are going to manage these documents, where we are going to store these documents, how we are going to share these documents, how we are going to version these documents, update these documents, retrieve these documents. All that is going to be part of your document management tool and technique in the planning domain. So this is one of the pictures that you see for the document management flow, how we take in the documents, we scan them, we copy them, we print them, we store them in a server, we upload it onto the cloud, and the team is going to have access to that while logging into SharePoint on their personal computers and review and download these documents when needed. Then the next important one, in fact very important one, is the integrated change control. Now, as we know, when we are working on projects, there is always change, and especially if you're working in the waterfall methodology, which in which change is really tough to handle, because as I said before, it's in waterfall format, so you have to have the requirements, the design and everything done to go to the next step, and then you're going to do the testing, you're going to do the development, and all of a sudden there is a change. It's tough to go back and fix it, so it has to go through the integrated change control process if there is any change request that comes from the team or from the stakeholders. So we'll have to follow the integrated change control process. Now, when we are working with the agile methodology, agile is all about change. As we saw before, we are working in short sprints of a week or 2 weeks long. And one of the main reasons that we use agile methodology is because the requirements are not clear. The requirements are not set in stone, and the whole project, there's so much change that could happen. So that is one of the reasons why we are using the agile methodology. So unless there's a huge change, it won't go through the integrated change control in the agile methodology, because agile is all about change. But in waterfall, any change that comes up has to go through the integrated change control process. Now we're going to see what is integrated change control. Business analysts came to know that the requirements were missing. What should he or she do? Then a requirement change was requested. What should the BA or a PM do? What is the change control board and who do they consist of? Then the difference in the change control plan driven method versus change driven method. So plan driven method is the waterfall methodology and change driven method is the agile methodology. Then the integrated change control inputs, tools, techniques and outputs, and finally the integrated change control process. So when we go through this, we are going to take a look at the integrated change control process and how does it start, where does it originate, what happens to the change, who records it, who requests it, and then how, if it gets accepted, what happens to the change, if it doesn't get accepted, what happens to the change, and how the whole process is taken care of. So let's see the next process. The next technique we have, the next knowledge and skill in the planning process. As you can see, we have a lot of these techniques and knowledge and skills that we need to know for the planning process. And for your exam, it comprises of a big percentage of your exam, which is 22%. So let's get to the third domain, which is analysis, which has the most number of questions, and as you can see, it has the most number of knowledge and skills that we need to go through. So let's get going. So in this domain, we are doing analysis, where we are going to analyze the requirements, where we are going to decompose the requirements. So let's take a look at what we have over here in terms of the learning goals. So we are going to see what is decomposition. Is basically how are we going to break down the requirements. Activities involved in decomposition of a total project into work packages. How can a work breakdown structure be structured as What is the 100% rule? When is decomposition used? What is progressive elaboration? What is rolling wave planning? Then the work breakdown structure, inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. What is dependency analysis, gap analysis, change impact analysis, requirement traceability matrix, risk analysis tools and techniques. So there's a lot of analytical techniques, as you can see, we use during this process. And this is the work breakdown structure that we have. Is, for example, this is for house construction. We break down into all the different tasks like creating foundation, internal work, external work. The foundation is further broken down into excavation and steel erection. The excavation is further broken down into concrete, pouring concrete, curing, and strip. So this is the work breakdown structure. For example, in constructing a house, you will have a similar work breakdown structure if you were developing a software which shows all the tasks that are required to complete your project. So the whole scope of the project is right here in your work breakdown structure. Then we are going to see the dependency analysis, as in which task will come before, which task will come after, because the whole project is kind of dependent on each other, so I cannot purchase the material unless the structure is designed and I have got the approval from the city. I cannot build the foundation unless I have the materials and the design structure ready. So we are determining the dependency over here. Then we will look into the gap analysis, where we are presently and where we need to be. What is our desired state, and what is the gap that we have, and to fill this gap and to get to the desired state, what we need to do. So we are doing gap analysis over there. So I'm going to go down and take a look at more of these that we have. We are, as I said, we are doing change impact analysis. If there's any change, we are doing requirement change impact analysis. If this is the current requirement, if it changed, who is the owner, what is the impact that's going to happen? Is it going to be a high impact, low impact, a medium impact? We are going to calculate the qualitative and quantitative impact. Is there training going to be required? Is the change request? Which stakeholders are going to be impacted? Is it going to be a positive impact, a neutral impact, or a negative impact? Then this is the requirement traceability matrix that we have, where we are going to trace the requirements at any stage, any time that we need to. So that's where we are going to use the requirements traceability matrix throughout the project. Then we have the impact analysis that we need to do for any of the risk that happens, and which one is a high priority or which one is a low priority, and identify that. And we do decision tree analysis, where we need to make a certain decision. We are going to follow the decision tree analysis and get to our decision. So these are all the techniques, all the knowledge and skills that are used, and these analytical techniques are used for that. Okay, then we get to the business rule analysis. Again, this is an analytical technique where we understand what is the business rule, the thumb rules for business rules, decision tables, what is the decision table catalog consist of, what are decision tables. So if you take a look at some of the pictures that we have, is we have a decision table set up over here. This, for example, is for booking airfare. When you go on airfare, you want to put in some rules there. So if a customer goes in and tries to buy a ticket, so if he's buying an infant ticket, he's going to get a 50% off. If he's buying a first class business class ticket, it's like 200% of the ticket. So these are rules that are set so that when someone buys it, automatically it updates the information on the website. Then we have the business decision rule tree model, if this happens, if this is true, then we are going to take this action. If it is false, then we are going to take action 2. If this happens, we're going to take action 3, and so on and so forth. So this is the analysis model that will provide a graphical alternative to decision tables, the one that we saw earlier, by illustrating conditions and actions in sequence. So when we have this condition happens, what's the action? When we have this condition happen, what's the action? So that's what we are going to go through later on. There's the business rule analysis. Then we have the elicitation and the facilitation tool and technique. I don't need to cover this because I already did cover this technique in all the way up when we were working with all the domains. So we have elicitation and facilitation techniques that you see over here. So all these same techniques are used in your analysis domain, as you can see right here. Then we are going to get to the next one. Again, decision-making tools and techniques. Remember the Delphi and the multi-voting I talked about before. Again, we've covered this in all domains, and I won't be covering that. So if I slide through, this is what we had already covered before. Multi-voting, decision-making, consensus building techniques. Then let's get to the next one, the process analysis. This is about what process model we are going to use, what process groups, what knowledge areas. If you've already looked into the PMBOK guide, it shows, the process model, the framework that we have covered before. If I go to the picture, this is all the different process models, which is a software process model. Again, the examples are waterfall, agile, and lean. Then what we have is the process analysis, where we are going to create use cases. As business analysts, we'll be the ones who are going to create the use case and the actions that are required in the use case, and the users who are going to have these actions. So we have examples of what a use case is, what does it contain. Then we have a use case diagram for a restaurant, where we have the users and what they do in the restaurant. So this all will be covered in detail later on. Then in process analysis, we have dependency graphs that you could see over here. Process analysis, event analysis, we have process analysis data flow diagram, how the data information goes through in a flow. So you create a data flow diagram, and mostly you will use the software called as Microsoft Visio for creating these use case diagrams, data flow diagrams, state diagrams, any diagrams that we have. So those were all the process analysis tools and techniques or knowledge and skills that are used in the analysis domain, which is again 35% of your exam. So a lot of questions will be asked from this domain. Then we have is the interface analysis. What is the interface? What is the use of interface analysis? Advantages of interface analysis. What is analysis paralysis? If you are analyzing way too much than required and you're not going anywhere, then that is called as analysis paralysis. What is prototyping? You make a model of the product, that is prototyping. Then what is storyboarding? You write a storyboard of the events that is going to happen. Then what are website wireframes and what are they used for? Now this is for the user experience, where you make the wireframes for the website and show it to the customer and get approval for those. What is interoperability? So I'm just going to go through, see some of the diagrams. We have the context diagram for a restaurant. We have some interface analysis or blueprints or prototypes of models. So I'm going to show the customer the model, I'm going to show the blueprint diagram, and then I'm going to get an approval on that. Then we have wireframes for websites, as I told you. So this is an example of a wireframe that I'll be showing to the customer. Interface analysis, wires. Now this is another wires. This is the home page where you would have a header area, where you'll have a login, where you might have to create a profile. So these are all the different wireframes that could be used for interface analysis. Then let's get to the next one. Now we have data analysis, where we are going to analyze the data, where we are going to create data models. So then we are going to look into terms as data dictionary, glossary, data types, data models, entity relationship diagrams. How does these entities relate to each other? Then the state diagram, we are in this state and or we are in that state. And then how the state changes from one to the other. Then we have the context diagram, why, when, and where to use these context diagram, advantages and disadvantages of different data diagrams, and data flow diagrams. So data flow diagrams is basically how the data is flowing through the system, and that's what you will have to show to the team, to the customers. You will have to draw all these flow diagrams using primarily Microsoft Visio as the software for doing this. So let's see some of the diagrams that we have. We have the entity relationship diagrams. Is how does the entity relate to the other? There are different ones. Is one-to-one relationship, one-to-many relationship, many-to-many relationship. We're going to take a look into cardinality, what that means. Then we have a data modeling or state diagram, where this is a phone state diagram. It starts, and when it starts, it's on idle. Then the phone rings after the number is dialed. Then the call is answered. The phone is in use. Then if another call comes in, then do we have call waiting? You pick up the call. Then you can put it up on hold, finish the new call, then you finish the call, and then again the phone is idle, and then your state diagram is finished right there. Okay, so there's the state diagram. Then we have the data modeling context diagram. We've seen one context diagram before. Okay, here it is. So here you see the relationship of the restaurant with the supplier and the customer, and the interaction between them. The restaurant orders the supplies, the supplier supplies to the restaurant. Then we have the customer makes the order, customer sends the customer orders, the customer gives a payment, the restaurant serves the meals, the restaurant serves the receipt. So this is showing the context of the supplier and the customer in relationship to the restaurant. And we have some more data flow modeling, where you see some data flow modeling symbols, data flow movie rental system. Then again the context diagram for the movie rental system between the customer and the video store. And that pretty much finishes the data modeling, knowledge and skill, data analysis from the analysis domain. So let's get to the next one that we have is the requirement types. Now when we are doing these requirements, so there are different types of requirement that we need to be aware of, and we need to write these requirements. So what are these requirements? What are business requirements? what are stakeholder user requirements, what are functional solution requirements, functional and non-functional requirements, what are project requirements, what is implementation, transition requirements. So we'll take a look at all these requirements in detail when we get to the requirement types. Now more analysis we have over here. This is root cause analysis. Now we are using these analysis to identify the root cause of a problem. So that's why it's called as the root cause analysis. We're going to see the benefits of the root cause analysis, steps to perform the root cause analysis. The other one root cause analysis that we have, type of technique that we use, is the 5 whys. And then we have the Ishikawa diagram or the fishbone diagram. So this is how it looks like. This is the Ishikawa diagram or fishbone diagram, where we are trying to find the main cause of the problem. So once we identify the cause, so the cause could be from machines, from processes, from people, from management, from environment, or from organization. So we have to fix the main primary cause or the secondary cause, whichever it is, to solve the problem. So that's why it's called as the cause and effect diagram, or the Ishikawa diagram, or the fishbone diagram. The other one we have is the 5 whys. We ask the question 5 times and then we find the root cause of the problem. The last one we have in analysis is system thinking. This is how we think about the project as a whole, not small individual pieces. Okay, how everything is integrated to each other. It's called as whole system thinking or integrative design. Like a simple example would be when you are building a library for a community. So we have to make sure that the whole community is involved in the process. What is the best way of making this library so that it could help everyone? Because this library is going to have a social impact in the community. And then we are going to see from how we are going to build it, where we need to build it, what is the best location, what is the best method, what is the best construction. We are going to involve all the stakeholders in the beginning. We are going to involve the architect, the designer, the contractor, the city guys. Everyone will be involved since the beginning of the project, and we think together of building this as a whole system rather than a small system. Rather than first the architect does the design on his own, then the construction is done by the contractor on his own, then the civil guy is doing the civil guy part on his own. But if all these are involved together in the beginning of the project and they work towards whole system thinking, they would have an integrated design where everyone is involved in the project. So that is basically system thinking, where we are thinking all together than just thinking on individual self for the design. So that finishes up with the analysis domain, which was 35% of the exam. Now let's go to the next one. This is the domain 4 for traceability. Now in traceability, this one is going to be 15% of the exam. We do have less number of processes here, as well as even in the last domain, which is evaluation. Again, we have 4 processes, and then we get done with all that we have for our PMI-PBA 40 knowledge and skills. So let's take a look at reporting tool and technique. As the name says, this is where we are doing the reporting, and we saw this one before. This is where we saw this one before when we were covering all domains. In that we have reports. How do we do the project reports, what are the reporting system, what is a status report, weekly or a bi-weekly status report, project performance report, then how we manage the information system, the trend analysis, and the variance analysis. So we'll take a look at that when we get there. Then we saw even the requirement traceability. This is important to trace the requirements throughout the project from start to finish. The requirements would have different versions, different updates, different changes. But we need to trace these requirements all the way from documenting these requirements to testing these requirements to developing these requirements, and so on and so forth. So you will see we have a requirement traceability matrix over here, which shows the project name, project manager, business analyst, who's the QA, who's the BA, who's the developer. Then it shows over here the BR is the business requirement. All the requirement will be listed over here. It will say if it is a functional, what is the category of the requirement, what is the requirement description, what is the use case reference number, design document reference number, code reference number, test reference number, and if that requirement was accepted, then the user acceptance validation number, and any comments. So we are tracing a requirement throughout the project, and that would be in your requirement traceability matrix. Then we have is version control. As I said, these requirements will go through different versions. So what is version control? What is version control, or it's even called as revision control? What is the process, and what's the diagram? How does it work? So we have to look into the version control when we get there. What is version control? So I'll explain this more in detail. Once we get done with this domain, as we saw, was traceability and monitoring. The next one, which is the last domain that we have, is evaluation. Now this is 10% of your exam. So let's see what we have in evaluation. What we are basically doing in the evaluation is evaluating all the requirements, evaluating if everything was done as it was planned with respect to the requirement management plan. So that's all that we are going to make sure that these requirements are validated before they are handed over to the customer. We make sure that we are providing them each and everything that they had requested and which was in the agreement. So some of the knowledge and skills that we have in the evaluation one is requirement measurement tool and technique, where we see what is plan gauge, what are benefits of plan gauge application examples, plan gauge keywords, what is a service level agreement, different types of service level agreements. The next one we have is verification and validation, as I was talking about earlier. This is where you are going to verify and validate all these requirements. If it met the customer's satisfaction, if it was designed to what the customer asked for, and for doing that you're using informal methods for verification and validation, which we are going to use requirement verification planning. We are going to use walkthroughs, where you walk through the requirement and see if everything looks right, where you're going to test the requirement using machines or testing softwares and see if the requirement was designed as it was requested by the customer. Then we are going to inspect the requirement for any bugs or any problems, or for the strength or weaknesses, where we are going to do desk checking, peer reviews, where we are going to look into the acceptance criteria, because every requirement that we have will have a certain acceptance criteria. So we have to make sure that the requirement fulfills the acceptance criteria. And finally, we even have is user acceptance testing, where once everything is designed, is developed, you have already tested it, the testing team, then there's going to be user acceptance testing, where the user or the customer is going to test the software or the product and see if everything works or if there are any changes that are needed before it is deployed live for everyone to use. Then we have the quality management tools and techniques. This is all about quality. Are we providing the quality to the customer as it was requested? So we are going to use some planned quality tools and techniques, cost benefit analysis, cost of quality, benchmarking, statistical sampling, brainstorming, affinity diagrams, matrix diagrams. We're going to look into quality assurance tools and techniques. We're going to look into quality control tools and techniques and quality control diagrams. Now, all these techniques would be covered when we get to the plan quality management topic in the evaluation domain. You're going to work with the quality control diagrams, where you have the cause and effect diagram. We saw this one, which was used even earlier. We have the control charts, the flow charts, the check sheets, the scatter diagrams, the Pareto chart, the histograms. So this all is going to be covered in the quality management in this knowledge and skill. Then we finally have the last one, which is the lesson learned and retrospective. Now, the lesson learned are important so that we learn from the mistakes that we have done, so that the future projects can avoid those mistakes. So we have to do lesson learned. In fact, the whole team does lesson learned, and we have to make sure it is documented for future projects. So what are the lesson learned and retrospectives? Lesson learned documents. Purpose of lesson learned documents, why we need them. Lesson learned review sessions, and advantages and disadvantages of lesson learned. So this basically completes a review of all the 40 knowledge and skills that is required for your PMI-PBA. So basically the whole length and breadth of your PBA exam is over here, which I am going to cover next is in detail, where I go through each and every domain, cover each and every slide. So this was more of a review, as you can see, but I'm sure it will help you understand at least the depth of the PMI-PBA exam. So I hope you found this lecture helpful, and with this, I'm signing off. I'll see you soon in the next chapter. Thank you for listening. This is Tutor Ali. Bye-bye.